Have you guys ever wondered what would happen if your loved one dies and they promised you certain things but they did not put it in writing? What situation do you find yourself in? I don't even think you have to wonder, because we all know the stories of what happens when there is no will in place. There's nothing enforceable, it's not legal. There's fighting about children, there's fighting about money, there's fighting about houses. We're going to simplify all of that for you today. Stay tuned. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Relebogile Mabotja podcast, where we don't just speak to interesting people, we also speak about interesting things. But today it's more than just interesting. Today we are speaking about something that I feel like, particularly as Africans, we don't talk about much in our homes with our families, but it is National Wills Week in South Africa, which means we need to have that difficult conversation of what should happen should I leave this earth. I know, please know I dread it. Even at home when I'm trying to talk to my parents, it gets very awkward. But why is this important? Because so many of you are stuck burying family members, particularly immediate family, without any direction because there are no wills. And not just the wills, we also have to look at the estate planning. Can you imagine the amount of drama that can be solved by one document? So don't worry, I've got all of the experts that are joining us today, and thank you so much to Sunlam Trust for bringing this conversation to all of you right here on my YouTube channel. Subscribe and hit the notification bell. Let us know about the other important conversations that you would like to have with us. So let me welcome our guests that are joining us today. Our very first one is Advocate Sankie Morata, who is the CEO of Sanlam Trust. And Advocate is not alone. Joining him is Dr. Mavis Mazhura, who is a behavioral science expert. And if you're like, what is that? This is the person who actually looks at our behaviors and gets to understand why it is we do the things that we do. So I think we've got the right people in the room. Lering.
Thank you. All good.
Thank you for having us. We're looking forward to the conversation.
I want to kick off with the survey that Sunlam did. And it speaks specifically to how many people actually have wills in place. What did your survey find?
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, our findings is that, 34% of people are only the ones that have wills, and 70% of people are thinking about to have wills. And if you look at the survey that we did, 66% of people in South Africa are still not having wills. And that is quite concerning, and which is actually dragging from last year's survey that we did, which is showing that more people are not taking wills very serious in terms of actually drafting and finalizing one.
I would think that with the number of burials that happen a weekend, you go to Avalon, you go to West Park, there's so many funerals happening. I would have thought that over time, and maybe doctor, you can come in here, that we would be waking up to say, I know my dad had nothing, but he still needed to give me some kind of direction, or I never want to find myself in a situation like this again. I mean, doctor, do you think that the numbers going down is a shock to you, or is it reflective of what you understand with our human behaviors?
So I think there was a slight increase of 4%, which is not big enough considering where we sit. But it's not shocking if we understand that we're not just irrational human beings, we are psychological beings. Right. So I think what we see is that we are social animals that really try and mimic other people's behaviors. So we learn through social, interaction. We have heard that, monkey see, monkey do. We've also heard that the average of 5 people that you spend time with. Yes. What is that about? We've got mirror neurons. We're constantly looking at what other people are doing, more than just what we are hearing. So if people around you don't have wills, and which is the case that we've seen that most families actually do not have wills, which is something cultural, something also, based historical. So we see then a lot of people still don't have wills because it's not happening in our immediate families.
Okay, before we even delve into the wills, it would be remiss of us not to touch on estate planning, because I think there is that confusion. How, when you talk estate planning, doesn't that mean drafting a will? Can you just clarify for us, Advocate Gore, the wills part is the document we're all aware of, and we will get into the details of what makes it valid, what makes it legal, all of those things. But where do wills fall in the context of estate planning?
Great stuff. Thank you, Relebogile. It's important to know that, a will is a result of estate planning, and where it's important who would have the ability to do an estate planning. You look at a client who have more assets, high net worth, or sort of type of a client where you're gonna have to do planning. What is it in estate planning? You sort of do an estate audit. You're looking at the review, the inventory list of all the assets that the person conducts or have. In terms of that, you look at the current assets being immovable assets, fixed assets, tangible assets, investments, and all that. And you look at should the person pass away today, what are the consequences in terms of the death taxes, the impact of that, and how can you change the situation? You have a fiduciary specialist coming in to help a client and say, okay, this is the recommended situation. Maybe, for example, stating that you would rather save more money and give that money to your children instead of paying SARS or actually paying into taxes. So that's where the beauty of estate planning comes through. And as a result of that, the estate planning will direct how you then have to draft your will and how it needs to look like. Not everyone needs estate plan to have a will. So it's a note to the notion or to the point that actually a person who just acquired assets or started working can also still have a will, so that at least we're not bringing a point that a will is only for the wealthy. A will is not only for the wealthy. It's for people who can just start, even a doctor, just finishing, medical school and all that. It's important. Or someone just starting a business, an entrepreneur, selling vegetables at home, on the streets and all that. We still need to make a will practical and favorable, for people.
And I think I'm so glad that you mentioned that part about, because I don't want anyone watching to be like, oh, they said assets and investments. I don't have any of those things. But the moral of the story is, in my will, I've even specified who gets my jewelry. Even if it's not from the diamond walk, but we still specify, because I think we also forget that there's certain things of sentimental value, and people have children and dogs, they have animals, and you want to be able to state clearly, let's say your house is left behind, who gets to use it? Because even this concept of family home has caused a lot of problems for everybody, and I think that's why this conversation is so important. So now we say the will would have been the result of estate planning, because in essence, even if I come to you as a first time, you're going to start by asking the same questions. I get it.
Yes.
So it's not, don't also worry and think, well, I don't have half of these things they spoke about. But the first thing that you are going to ask is, okay, what do you have? Do you work? Do you have an income? Are there policies? Are there things that you own? Or are there things that you may own? And that kind of thing. Doctor, I wanted to just touch on the fact briefly. You touched on cultural reasons of why we don't have wills. You've touched on the psychological part. I feel like we as millennials are more of the generation where we want to talk about death. We are comfortable to be like, we say it all the time. Oh, when I die, girl, you must make sure you wear this or put this face beat on me in my coffin. But my parents' generation, it is almost like you're speaking death into their lives. Why?
So I think it comes with all the taboos, the things that we sort of believe, that, sometimes the power of the word, if you speak about death, you are wishing me to die, or you could cause me to die. So we've got a lot of these beliefs that are around death, but we also have an issue of, I don't want to make you worry. Right, so I want to protect you. I don't want to evoke painful emotions in you by talking about my demise. So I avoid it because I'm trying to protect you. It's a protective stance. But there's also vulnerability, right? We don't want to be vulnerable. We don't want to be in that space where, I might not be here, or I might start to experience these emotions that I don't want you to see me struggling with those emotions. So I think it's that, so we avoid to talk about that. But also traditionally, you look at it to say, we had our own way that worked. The elders were always there to give information, to give direction, but there was that community and people also depended on each other, people listened to each other. That community is not so much there now. So that's different.
And
right.
I think, and I hope we can use this opportunity to not just encourage people to get wills, but to also encourage the people around them to get wills. Advocate, yes.
Yes, and I think it's also important just also looking at culture and what people believe and all that, or things that are associated, with the will. I always say, if you think about funeral covers, people have a lot of funeral covers, which means that there is some thought. People have thought about death, and it's difficult. We need to change those generational patterns and behaviors as well. And I do think that nowadays we ought to empower the people to have the conversation. Our question would be, how do we empower the society to have these conversations? For example, it was a tough, having a conversation with my grandmother. I said to my grandmother the other day, I said, Grandma, you know that one day you're going to go. She's 94. That was, when she was already 60. I said, you're going to have a will. And if you don't going to have a will, there's going to be chaos. And you'll be resting in peace. But, my siblings and brothers and all that, we're going to be fighting for your house and all that. You are the person who loves peace. And it was not easy because already people think, I don't have money, to bequeath. Also, do you think that I'm going to die or something like that? Similar to my mom, a real life story. I said, Mom, we're going to have to take a will. Otherwise, it's going to be a problem and all that. Should I die? You guys want, my life insurance or something like that? I said, okay, we're going to have, without your life insurance or your funeral cover, we're going to still have to get to a point where we do a will. And, to break that, I still respect the two ladies because they did, go and draft a will at their own time and all that. So I think we got to have to show the people the importance and the love. It's not about always the fear where you have to scare the people, but show the people the consequences, of not having a will that, wrong people might inherit, or your children, you have a potential conflict that you actually have to proactively manage in your family.
Yo, I'm so glad you are sharing that, because I think that's the reality for many people watching, where they try to bring it up and then it becomes let's discuss it later, and the conversation just never happens. Maybe we can just touch on, Doctor, what are some of the questions, maybe without going straight for the jugular of like wala will, where maybe you can start easing them into it? Because I would, for instance, start by saying, I was updating my will and I was thinking, then I'm like, by the way, where do you want to get buried? That's how I kind of try to sneak it in. But what tricks can you share for everybody as to how to ease into the conversation?
All right. So I think we're going to center it around love and care, which is what you said earlier on. So what do you love, and who would you love to get what you have when you're not there?
Like your
people
scarves.
like to, like your scarves.
I see you love your scarves.
Yes, who would you like? Yes, so
I like that.
Really framing it around love and care. Then people open up, because then it's not as scary. I'm not, when you're talking about who do I love, I'm not thinking about my dying. Right. So I think it's the framing where we need to really speak more about. It's a love language. We're really talking about what we love, what is important to us, who is important to us. It's about the people we love, right? More than just, your demise.
With regards to what you were saying about if so many people have funeral policies, right? Why is the will conversation not happening? Is it because the legal requirements for funeral policies are quite low? You don't even need to tell a person you're getting a funeral policy. And I just feel like every person says in their minds, I remember paying this much, let me just get a policy. So maybe there is a process in that where death is still not spoken about, as you said. It still becomes a personal thing. You go to your bank, you go wherever, you take out a policy. You don't even need to tell anybody.
Relebogile, I do think that, there are certain parts of the conversation where we're not sharing or being transparent. where people are stating that, it's all about creating money and all that, but you gotta have to create a legacy. I mean, you gotta have to create wealth, to give it away, to transfer. If people don't have that wealth, or they are not, given the opportunity, to create that wealth, then it becomes actually a single-minded, single-focused advice on the funeral covers and all that. So I do believe that fiduciary, being wills and estate planning, it's centered at financial planning, where we gotta have to talk about financial planning, the psychology of money. How do we, create wealth, and how do we protect that particular wealth, and also come to the point in terms of creating the legacies of love. Creating the legacies of love. So financial futures. What is it that you want your children, your grandchildren to see? I might be poor now or today, but if I have put certain measures in place in terms of, fiduciary-centered advice, when I pass away, there might be a policy payable into the estate and all that, and then that can create, a legacy. For children, you're giving them a step up. To a particular point. How many times do we talk about, I wish I was a trust kid. I wish I was a trust kid. It's because
I'm a trust fund baby. Yes.
So, and we cannot, let's create that legacy to say, let's allow our children not to live the life, that we actually experience, and then have the, changing, patterns, break the patterns in terms of things that we are used to.
I was thinking that maybe you can break the ice by being like, who must inherit your debts? And then they'll get excited and start the list. But on a serious note, let's talk about what is included in a will. So let's say I'm coming to you and I'm like, Advocate, I'm starting out. I actually have just left varsity, but I heard Relebogile talking about this, wills. Now I'm coming to you. Where do we even begin? What are some of the questions that you start off with?
Yeah, the most important thing, it needs to be about, in terms of, are you married? What is it that you want to achieve? The legacy that you want to create and all that. And also your life planning. What is it that, and many a times we don't talk about life planning. We think that life planning is, disintegrated from financial planning. Life planning and financial planning goes together. I might finish at university, being young, being that medical student that just finished, but I know there's an opportunity, to grow. I have that smaller car, Scuva Donkey car, that I still need to, to get me from point A to B, but also I'm still renting. Maybe in the future, I would be, considering buying property and all that.
So we would talk through not just where I am right now, but also the potential and where I want to go.
Yes, definitely. So you gotta have to then, that's most important information. And also, looking at, do you have kids? Type of marriage, if you don't have kids, and who is it that you want to create, the future for, or the legacy for as well. And take everything that is either movable, immovable, as things, or even your investments, your savings that you have in the bank. It might be 50,000 rand. You still have to make sure that there's a way that it's going to be distributed. I always say, don't actually underestimate people who are starting. They have the potential. Everyone, you just don't start. You start with the hope and the potential, with the trust as well that, something good is going to happen. And that's the positiveness that we need in the life journey as well.
I'm going to come back to why the marriage question is so important and big. Before we get there, I want to talk about, in terms of the burial. Why is that such a big deal? Because that's another thing that people are able to state, is where they'd like to be buried, if they'd like to be buried, if they'd like to be cremated. I have an aunt who has told us time and time again, she wants to be cremated. She doesn't want too much drama and fuss. She's already told us exactly where her ashes need to sit. And she's sung that song so many times. If it doesn't happen that way, she's going to come and haunt us for the rest of our lives. But you do get those people who, let's say it is an individual who is separated from their husband, that could become a whole court case. If the will did not clearly state, because maybe the family says she must be back in KZN and the husband says, no, she must be right here where the kids can see her. Well, why is that such a sensitive but also important line to include in a will?
Yeah, I think the chaos you've just explained, where if there is none, now people must now be fighting over a body, a corpse, to decide where they're going to get buried, if there are family dynamics, right? So being able to clearly state what your last wishes are, because if there isn't, then somebody's going to decide on your behalf, right? But it might also not be an easy decision, right? Because now you might have family saying, no, they're coming to my house, and the husband says, no, to my house. So when you state it clearly, you are just at least relieving people of the having to make decisions or fight over a decision when they're already mourning.
Which in essence, I mean, I have family who say to me, all we did anyways, fight amongst yourselves. But the reality is that is a legal document that you can take to court that says this was this person's wishes, assuming all of the legal boxes have been ticked off. And for us to also be reminded, it is, as you said, your last wishes, it's your last will and testament.
Yes.
Outside of all of those details, Advocate, I do know, and maybe you can help us understand, what is a living will and why is it different to this specific will, so that we all are fully aware of what type of wills we are referring to.
In terms of the living will, it's, the will that has your wishes in terms of should something happen to you, let's say you are at the deathbed, in terms of, you're giving instructions to the doctor, while you are struggling and all that to remove the oxygen or to really, proceed or accelerate, the process of death so that you then don't have to struggle and all that. So, and also in terms of that, if there are certain things in terms of your organs that you would have to decide whether, at what point, and what sort of death that happened, maybe you're involved in an accident, and there are certain organs or parts of your body that you still wish to, to be provided or, to be donated, for medical research and all that. And also I think it's so important, to make that distinction so that at least people know that, there is a will where you traditionally have to demonstrate in terms of how your assets needs to be distributed, bequeathed and given to the people as well. So also it is, I think, for me important that when coming to the the point of burial and all that, let's not ignore the fact that most of the South Africans, we move from one place to the other. We are not married or doomed to one. I might come from Hamarishani in Limpopo and work in Cape Town, but I wouldn't want to be buried in Cape Town, even though I'm married and all that. Then I would have to demonstrate that wish. In the will, and also tradition as well has taught us. Trusted with my family as well. I had a clause at some point in my will to say, I want to be cremated. And my mom said to me, you know what, you'll be gone by that time. I'm going to bury you.
Listen, I love it for your mom, because those are the real dynamics and the realities we're dealing with. Is at the end of the day, the people that have the chief say, and maybe that's a good point to share. Advocate, can you maybe give us a highlights reel of if you don't have a will, what usually happens? Because there is we know of all the drama that can come of wills not being found, not being legally signed. Hey, is that even the signature? Or just no will at all? What does the government have to do if there's no will?
There are a lot of things, Relebogile, that happens. If you die intestate, you die without a will. It's really a very miserable journey, a bad journey in terms of you would have to go to the Master of the High Court, report to the estate, and the consequences that comes with that is that it depends who is the surviving, descendants and all that. You might have the problem with that is that it's going to be distributed according to the Act, Interstate Succession Act, where you got to have, if the parents, it is your spouse surviving, then your surviving spouse can get that. If there's no surviving spouse and children, your parents, and if there are no parents, your siblings and adopted children as well, everyone can inherit. And let's not ignore the fact that, we have situations where people die simultaneously, or the whole family at once. We had an accident, on the N3, people coming from Durban to Johannesburg. Do you ask yourself what then would happen in that point? point, if there's a baby left there, you gotta and there's no will, you gotta have to make sure that there is a will. Who's going to be the guardian of your child? And if you haven't drafted a will and you didn't even put a provision in terms of the guardian, that can render the process quite long and difficult. And remember, nowadays, we have children with autism, we have vulnerable children, minor children, we have children who are in drugs and all that, who would squander the money or do whatever, or we even have spendthrifters. Then you go to the court, your surviving parent or whoever has to go queue at the master's office, to register that, and you need an expert. If your estate is more than 250,000, then you'll need an attorney to assist you. But also, if it's less than 250, we call it Section 18.3, where the family would have to be assisted or can themselves, administer that. So the problem is that, when you have, you don't have a will, you have to have someone to take control of your assets immediately. Whereas where you have a will, an executor will take control of that.
Yes.
Many things happen at death. Immediately at death, you'll have your aunties,
the bank accounts get frozen. So don't be like, I know Bunny had money in the account and I know the PIN. So I'm glad you're saying that. And I think what makes it so important as well, of you mentioning the executor, when you as the family are going through this grieving process, it helps, and the executor can be a family member that you all trust, but it helps just relieve that burden of, while you're grieving, trying to plan a funeral, you now are worried about 10 million other things, which we know estates can take years to get wrapped up.
Yes, definitely, and that's the consequences that comes with not having a professional executor, because it's also important to have a professional executor. If I'm going to take my aunt and make my aunt my executor, she has no knowledge of the legal jargons, legal processes and all that. So it's so important that, nowadays, with high respect, I do know that the Master's Office is working hard, to make that turnaround, to improve their turnaround. But then you run the risk of actually staying there, that estate being administered for more than even 2 years or 3 years, taking long. And also, you run the risk, remember, you got of your assets, even your properties. If, the deceased had properties somewhere and all that, and those properties were not insured, and there's no executor taking control of those properties, people might go and stay there and all that, and that way you've wasted the wealth, that you accumulated so hard. So it is quite important, to run away from the risk of having, not having a will. And important, I think, the message that I want to bring, and not, creating any fear or any anxiety, but do you know that, if then in terms of the Guardians Fund, looking for the minor children, making sure that there's maintenance and all that, sometimes you can get payment twice a year, not monthly, whereas where you have a trust established or a testamentary trust established, orphan trust, established, for orphan children, then you are able, to monthly look at the general well-being of that particular child. And if the government doesn't really identify the beneficiaries of your estate, after 30 years, you run the risk of that money going into the government, coffins and coffers. What is it then that's going to happen in terms of that? Your families, your relatives will be sitting there, without any benefit from your estate.
And the money basically is just sitting frozen in obscurity somewhere where you need to chase after it. So in terms of then the legal requirements for a valid will, can we talk through that? Because I think this is where, and I've seen templates being sold, but let's clarify exactly what needs to be. So firstly, it needs to be original.
Great stuff. A will needs to be original, and you need to ask yourself, who is the partner that you're doing your will with? You need to do your will with your trusted advisor, with someone that you trust, with a company that has reputation, has the experience in terms of wills and estates administration, not just taking anyone or at the corner, to do your will. It's such an important document. At the age of 16, you have the freedom, to, write your will. You can start, signing and doing that. and bequeathing that. And your will needs to be signed, as well, and make sure that, it's signed properly. We have professionals, testamentary consultants, we have intermediaries, financial advisors who would take you through that particular process and making sure that your will is signed at the end. And also important to make sure that in that will, you have witnesses. And there are regulations in terms of who can be a witness to a will.
You can't be beneficiary and witness. Because then you're like, voila, 10 million, papa, and then sign this. So, and I'm glad you're saying that, because the part of witness, you would think that the person that you're saying, okay, as my firstborn son, I'm giving you the house, sign up. But that's not actually how it works. And the law does that to protect people from whatever sinister situations may be coming out, or foul play, if we say. So you keep it quite independent. So it has to be signed. There have to be witnesses under certain rules of who's allowed to be a witness, who's not allowed to be a witness. And then, of course, I know the date is everything.
Yes. So it's very important to date your will. Otherwise, you can have, someone somewhere sitting in Limpopo, Haskukuni, drafting your will and stating that, at this so and so you did the will, and then that will revokes the will that you have done and all that. So we gotta have to still check that. So the date is quite important in terms of that, because the last will is the one that can actually be used to apply to the master, to get the letter of executorship, and to administer the estate. The last will revokes, takes away all other wills that that you've had before that. And I think also just to mention in terms of the will, with all the requirements in terms of the law, the formalities and all that, and we do have quality and control that really oversees and check that clients have signed wills accordingly, properly, and all that. Over and above that, the will must be simple and practical.
Yes. And obviously you can't put in your will, remember that body I hid, can you move it after? You can't put anything illegal in the will, of course. And in terms of the legalities of what gets implemented, right? So what does the law say in terms of a lost will and testament? If, we've touched on conflict and things like that, but outside of conflict, if there's something that's not physically possible anymore, like let's say they say Avalon is full and the person says, I want it to be buried at Avalon, but now there's no more burials. What does the law say in terms of what a family can do in that situation?
It might not only be Avalon, it might be, for example, if I may bring the other example where, the other parties or beneficiaries in the will, they don't want to stay in the house. They want the house to be sold. Maybe the mom or the dad might have said all must stay in that particular house. So it renders it impractical for some who's staying in Bloemfontein or wherever. So what is important, the family or the beneficiaries needs to go and engage with the executor, where you find that they will do a redistribution agreement. They will agree in terms of changing certain things, but also there with objectivity that everything needs to be fair, and and beneficiaries need to agree. We've seen so many families where the siblings have taken each other to court, and it has been prolonged processes and all that. So I think also it's always important to also have a substitution in a will. Know that alternatively, if certain thing cannot be done, what can be the second point or way of administering or bequeathing a particular asset in the will.
I want to come back to the part about marriages, and the reason I left it to this part in the end is because I sometimes think people have a misconception. So let's speak specifically marriages in community of property, right? Which is what many people find themselves in. They get married traditionally, and you are recognized by law even without a marriage certificate. You can still go and prove gore le nyetse. Now, sometimes in wills, or in the thinking of people, you think you can say, kick my wife out the house when I'm gone. But technically, your will when you are married applies to your half of the estate.
That's correct.
Maybe just chat to us about that so that we all know and understand it. If you're watching and you're like, I'm married, can I go out of... late. You are in community, so you must be doing this process together.
And you must enjoy the benefits of the consequences of the in community.
Yes.
Yeah, very important aspect or point there. You only owning the half of the estate.
Yes.
And, and you in joint community with liabilities and also with assets. So then what needs to happen when death comes through, you're going to have to, divide that particular estate. And you can only, in terms of your will, make sure that you bequeath assets, 50% of your assets. But that's where planning and advisory of wills, where you need a specialist to assist you. Can you imagine? Let me just make an example with a house. You have, a house there, you own 50-50, and then you say you bequeath the 50%, I, Sankie, bequeath 50% to my brother, and then
now your brother comes in.
And yes, and then that creates, it makes it unbearable,
Yes.
and then all
Yes.
that. So we need to engage, and I want, estate massing is when you combine the two estates, or you combine certain assets, together to agree to say, I relinquish my ownership. Should you die first, then I must that estate make sure that house is gonna be there. But
So the question, sorry, on what you just said. So in essence, a husband can say, in their part of the estate, they can say, I bequeath my portion of the house
Yes.
to the wife and the kids. And that will already safeguard her and the kids
Yes.
from anybody else coming after the house. Because it would be very awkward if he says, I leave everything to my mother. And now what can happen?
It's not practical, and yes, and it becomes, you create family feuds, fight, chaos, and all that. So let me just make an example. I had a client somewhere, I'm sorry, I'm not picking.
He's obsessed with Limpopo. I love it for us.
So, during COVID, both spouses married in community of property. COVID happened, and then they were both, they got sick the same night, both went to the hospital. Before that, they both transparently went, to their wills consultant.
Oh, wow.
They did a will, so that should something happen, and their wills were mirroring each other.
Yes.
So if you're the first one to pass on, you give me your 50%, and then that's all. And then what happened? Then they survived. They got out of the hospital. But then what happened? The wife went and changed the will at the consultant without telling the husband. And then, God has his own ways of dealing and doing things. And then, unfortunately, the wife passed on and then left the husband. And they had, a son. And, and the son, the lady came with from another marriage. And the lady bequeathed everything, 50%, to the son. But forgetting that, there is 50%. And they had properties, 4 properties and all that. Now the son doesn't work and all that. Now, do you want to sell all the properties? Do you want to sell everything that of sentimental value and all that? So that was then forced, to happen. So what I'm trying to demonstrate is that you can have unintended consequences. Spouses, families in a marriage in community of property needs to be more transparent. Needs to talk about, their finances, their death. And I do believe that, yes, we do have a high rate of divorce. We're always scared of things happening. But marriage is built on a trust and is a product of love, and create a legacy of love.
The young people do not, they say, clock it. That's what they say. Doctor, from your perspective, when do people usually think about updating their wills, and when do they actually do it? Because I'm already sitting here thinking, when last did I update my will? and I really want the conversation to burn a bit of a fire under us,
right,
to do what we need to do, because there are the people who have the wills. This conversation is going to remind them to update, because maybe they got married and they've had 2 kids and they haven't updated that old will.
All right. So I think it's a reflection of your money behavior, because you're separating your will from your money. You're dealing with money every month. You are every day swiping or using money, right? So a will is part of the money cycle, right? At the end, the protection. So how often do you actually sit and do, your review of the goals you have, a review of, the investments you have, also a review of the protection that you have.
Okay.
So you are probably having an incomplete money cycle. You are starting, maybe you're focusing on paying debt, you're focusing on earning and managing it, and you're not going all the way to investing and protecting. So if you're going through the money cycle, which is ideally every year, you want to be able to review. And also if you have a financial plan, I find it very easy if you have a financial planner where you put it on a yearly basis to say, I am sitting with my financial planner to review my finances, but part of that is reviewing my own will. So
when's a good time to do it? On your birthday or beginning of the year? My reminders are, I just got all the medical appointments. Hey, we must do this with the will. And of course, we have National Wills Week to remind all of you to get to what you...
End of year is also a good year.
Yes.
What have I done during year? I'm reviewing my year. So I'm also reviewing my will.
Okay. I absolutely love that. And I think it's important when you do review and update, all legal requirements need to be met, or else the old will still applies. Just in terms of if your will is old and it did not make mention of children, does the government take into consideration that you do have children now, and then they force rules as if you did not have a will?
Very important
right
question.
Because I think we don't want people to be freaked out and think the government would just dismiss the existence of your children, because they can by law supersede somebody's will if need be.
When you have a will, everything that you have drafted, that you have specified in the will be executed. If you didn't indicate, children in your will, or maybe saying, should I have children, or, earlier I spoke about substitution, or created a provision in the will, and your will is silent about children, you're just talking about your grandmother, your father, your siblings, it will go to those people. In cases where there is no will, and you happen to die intestate, you didn't show any interest, you didn't have an opportunity to indicate, how your estate needs to be distributed. Obviously, in terms of the intestate succession, your children would have to be the ones to inherit, your assets and all that. But also important is that we follow that particular legislation. If the surviving spouse with their children as well. And you gotta have to sometimes prove, you have people coming through and saying, this is Sankie's son, this is Sankie's daughter, and the whole family didn't even know about Sankie's daughter. So you gotta have to make sure that fertility and all that.
That's a whole nother episode you need to come back for. Before we wrap up, what is this F factor? And I know you started alluding to it, that Sunlam is doing. Talk to us about it.
At Sunlam, we empower people to live with confidence. So we want to make sure that our clients are empowered to make rightful decisions. They are able to create legacies. And we give them the tools and the means, having the financial advisor or the intermediary, having a conversation, in conversing and engaging with the client. And access to financial planning, for everyone in South Africa is very important. And financial literacy is important. So when you talk about wills and people empowerment, you holistically empower the people. So you don't look at one aspect and then thinking that, you have empowered the people. So we're making sure that, we make sure people live with confidence, and we eliminate the fear because fear doesn't actually build people. Fear makes people not to make decisions. And people would have passed on or, without making a rightful decision. And I think important is asking themselves to say, what sort of love legacies do I want to create for my people? If I love my children, do I want them to get to better schools? Can I create trust for them? Can I create a bursary fund and donate money out of my assets? If I'm a single person, I'm not married and I don't have children. There's people who in rural areas that need that, and we are able to help you with Intervivos Trust, with Testamentary Trust. We will empower you to live with confidence.
Doctor, these numbers can get a little bit confusing. The 34%, the 66%, and I know you've already touched on the fact that, yes, there was a bit of a 4% increase, but what are we not seeing the numbers tell us? From that human behavioral perspective, what more did the survey actually share with us?
I think one of the things that it shared is seeing that if your family members already have a will, your chances of also having one is high. But also if your family didn't have, your chances of also doing it. So there's inertia. It actually mentioned the word inertia. And when we're talking about inertia, we're talking about in motion stays in motion. So family in motion stays in motion. If we've been doing wills, we continue to do wills. But if we haven't been doing wills, then chances are someone has to break the pattern. So I think it's going back to legacy and redefining and reframing legacy to say legacy is not just about inheriting and having, it's also about creating. Can you be the first in your family to create that legacy where you are the starter, you are creating this whole journey for your family?
And I mean, it would probably help then that if you are the one who's starting to have the conversation, because you normalize it and we desensitize ourselves to the fact that we're talking about death. It's not actually what we're talking about. We're talking about, as you said, financial planning.
We're also talking about love, responsibility, and relief. You talked about freeing people of fear, creating financial confidence, and being future ready. One of the things that we fear is we fear to die, but we also fear what happens to the people that we leave behind. And that can get you stuck. Right. So, but when you actually do it to say, okay, I love my people, I love the people that I'm leaving behind, I want them not to have this chaos or confusion, I want them to grieve peacefully because I've put my house in order, I've put the will in place, they know exactly what to do with what I have. I think also another fear is people are thinking, I don't have assets. So there's something called asset salient. So I think when people think, why must I write a will? I think there was a large number that says, I'm not having a will because I don't have assets. But I think people forget that, you have a phone that needs to get unlocked. Who do you want to unlock it? You've got a social media that wants to be wound up. What is it called? Who's going to close those social media, right? Who's going to close your bank account, right? So those are some of the things that, we need to start thinking. It's not necessarily, a will is not about people who are wealthy, people who have money. A will is just really stating, your last wishes. Who's going to take that loved book of yours? Who do you want to own that? So I think it's really looking at
those family recipes.
Yes, those family recipes. Who do you want to be able to take that and love it the way you loved it? Who do you think has the potential of loving it the way you loved it? Your kids. Who do you want to raise your kids? So you might say, I don't have assets, but most of us have got children, right? Okay, so how do you...
They are liabilities. But I completely get you, and I think you are driving the point home of the fact that if you only focus on the assets and the financial planning part, you're not doing the life planning part, which is so important.
Right.
So just then on human behavior, what do the people that are listening and are feeling like I need to do something, what would you say they should do as soon as they are done watching this whole episode?
So I think another thing that comes through is the fear of legalese. So I'm sitting close to the advocate and he was using fiduciary. And I'm thinking, right? So I think we need to simplify the language of wills. Yes, it's a legal document. You also need to understand the historical context of South Africa, where the legal system has always been seen as unfair. Right,
and that
punishing a certain group of people, you can't trust it. So how do we bring trust back? It's about community, it's about family, it's about your loved ones. So if you're watching and you're thinking, what do I need to do? Do you have a financial planner? Do you have someone that you can reach out to, who can, who you can have a conversation around, drafting your will? But also there's access of, legacy, estate planning. There's organizations that are really busy, not busy, or that are experts in that. So you can also reach out to people. But also people think it needs money. So that's also another thing. People are not doing it because then I need money to pay for it. So sometimes people stop because they think I don't have money to go and do that, the actual payment. So I think it's really simplifying it. As it's simple. It's not a big thing. It's not about legal. It's about what do you want your last wishes. How do you want your last wishes to be respected?
Thank you so much, Doctor, for reminding us that we need to handle these conversations with love and care. It is a very sensitive one, but it also is one where now we know better, so we need to do better. And what that means with doing better is that we're going to put a link right down below. Check out the caption and you'll be able to click the link so you can get started on your very own will. And I promise you, it's simpler than you think. Don't be deterred by the big words like fiduciary duties. Don't worry about all of that. Start where you are with what you have, and I can promise you it is going to be so simple that you're even going to start now having that difficult conversation with your loved ones. And some of them might even surprise you and say, funny you should ask. I've been actually trying to work on my will. Let's talk through it together. So that's what we're all going to be doing this National Wills Week. If you don't already have one, click the link below, use it. If you do have one, click the link below and you can update it, because why not? And thank you again to Sanlam Trust for bringing this extremely important conversation to our awareness. It's not something that needs to be happening once a year. We need to do it regularly and to empower and educate and give knowledge to all of those that we love around us. Thank you for joining us on the Relebogile Mabotja podcast. Subscribe, hit the notification bell. Let us know what else you'd like to see us do on this show, and we'll be back together next time.